Mike,
Steve.
while we're writing season 2 of The Last Resort, what we should really do with our times, we could discuss the characters' favourite movies.
Interesting concept, Steve, because I like movies and, well, you like movies and our characters like movies too.
Then it's settled. The Last Resort Movie Club is born. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bad Scripts Movie Club, the Last Resort Movie Club. So welcome again to our co-host and Britain's brightest boxer short wearing beauty. It's Mr. Mike Garlia. Hi, Mike. How are you?
Hi, Steve. That was a very interesting introduction then. Where were you going with that? Did you change your mind halfway through saying something?
I changed my mind before I even started speaking and afterwards, and still it was absolutely batshit crazy. So
I've got to ask though. I've got to ask, why are you thinking about my underwear right now? This is.
I'd rather not answer that.
In the amount of years we've known each other, you have never once brought that up to me
your
personally.
underwear.
My underwear. Even when we live together.
We have discussed your underwear on several occasions. Even on this podcast, we've discussed your underwear. So we've talked about your Simpsons silk boxers and the holy ones.
They weren't silk. God, no, they weren't silk. They were, I think, probably more polyester than anything else. So, from the market, where you get 5 pairs for like £1.
Yep, I remember them very well. But here's a question for you: have you ever owned and/or worn silk underpants? Silk boxers.
Well, I don't think I've worn underpants since I was a child. As for boxer shorts, silk ones, I don't actually own a pair of silk boxer shorts, I'm afraid, now.
Yeah, you didn't answer the question. Was have you ever worn?
Have I ever worn? I don't know. I can't remember. What about, have you?
I think so at some point. I think there was a time during my teen years where I thought, I am the absolute dog's bollocks because I'm wearing silk underpants, and all the ladies will come flocking as a result of not being able to see these silk underpants. But the confidence they will give me will be like.
I imagine that now. I get silk boxer shorts because they're meant to be a bit flappy and baggy. I'm struggling to connect with silk underpants. Are they elasticated and they hold everything in place?
I'm just using the general term there for underwear. So, boxer
silky pair of white fronts, like kind of yellow and green.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether the granny knickers in silk really do anything for anybody, but there we go. But we digress. It's the movie club.
Quickly, very quickly.
Pants. I mean, we dealt with pants last episode, and that was Spice Girls, and that was pretty pants as far as I can tell. Nice smooth segue.
I think we split our listeners. With that one. I think there were some not happy. Maybe some agreed. Maybe some wasn't happy. And I think the coincidence is we've started recording every 2 weeks now because we've got lots going on and we're writing a new series. Coincidence that happened during the Spice Girls movie, that because I must admit I've needed a few weeks to actually get over that experience.
Yeah, it does feel very much like there's some form of PTSD going on from having to endure that movie. Having said that, I have actually looked forward to tonight's movie because it was one of my own childhood favorites, and I'm excited to talk to you about it, Mike, because we both independently watched this movie again recently in order to discuss it, and I believe this was Daisy's choice of film. Not the first person I would have thought it would be, but yeah, our wardrobe manager has provided us with a brief audio recording back in the day. So shall we play that now and see how it goes?
What was that? You're asking people what my favourite movie is like? I have too many that I cannot narrow it down to one. So I'll give you the last one I watched, which was Evil Dead 3, Army of Darkness. Bruce Campbell absolutely brilliant, man. Really, really good. Loved it every second. And I cannot say any more than that. Thanks.
Wow, okay. So Daisy likes a little bit of Bruce Campbell. Who knew?
The big chin, the big clef. He has a chin to die for. He really does. He really does. She didn't seem that enamored with it. I think she just was put on the spot a little bit from what it sounded like, and she just chose one. But still, you can't take or deny the fact that for a manly specimen, Bruce Campbell has got it all. So let me just go out. So this film came out in 1993, and in true Bad Scripts fashion, I'll read the synopsis. But I want to give you a baseline of the films that came out in 1993 before we go into this. Okay, so 1993 was a good year for films. Can you guess, at the top of your head, Steve, what films came out in that year?
I got a feeling that Jurassic Park was one of them.
Jurassic Park, the biggest film of the year, the film that changed blockbuster cinema as we know it. Any other guesses?
93, maybe Last Action Hero, or was that a bit earlier?
Wasn't Last Action Hero. So would you like to hear a couple of films that came out?
Go for it. You tell me.
Just to get you back in. Okay, so it was a mixture of year. You had Tom Cruise in the Firm. That came out. A weird Baldwin film called Sliver. You had Menace to Society, if you remember that one. Indecent Proposal. You also had In the Line of Fire, Tombstone, Alive, Super Mario Brothers, which we won't talk about. True Romance. We should. Falling Down, Demolition Man, Jurassic Park, Coneheads, RoboCop 3, and amongst many others. But alas, we are not covering any of those. We are covering the third installment of a trilogy that started in the 1980s, was banned as one of the first original video nasties. Arguably the only sequel in this film, despite the fact it's the third one. And as Daisy has said, we are covering Evil Dead 3, The Army of Darkness. Woohoo! Would you like the synopsis? You can tell I'm excited because I'm doing lots of talking on this one.
Absolutely, Mike. Fire away and tell us what the internet annals tell us about the Evil Dead 3, Army of Darkness.
Well, the overview is quite interesting, and it wasn't critically received well, but it's received a more of a cult following. It's actually, it scored around 7.3 on Rotten Tomatoes. It is what it is, and we'll get into some of those scenes and why it's a bit crazy on this one. But here is the overview for anyone that is not familiar with this trilogy. Bruce Campbell's in all three. He starred in The Evil Dead, the original film, where a bunch of 4 or 5 teenagers go to a creepy cabin in the woods, play an archaeological tape which summons the dead, and they start to possess people. It was banned. It infamously features a scene where a tree does some horrible things to a lady for some reason, probably for horror. It was then followed by Evil Dead 2, which sees Bruce Campbell return as the same character, Ash, who takes his girlfriend, for some reason, to the same creepy cabin in the woods. Now, I don't know what your thoughts on that, Steve. Is it a reboot or a sequel?
It is a sequel because the story does follow on, but it's almost like they've gone, we've got a bit more of a budget now. We've got a bit more of this. The first one was really well received. Let's kind of redo it, but we'll just kind of change it a little bit. We still had was it Linda, his original girlfriend? She was still in there as a character. Yeah, she was still in there.
So when you say change it up a little bit, and I'm going somewhere with this before I read the synopsis, just to kind of get our audience up to speed. When you say change it a little bit, what do you mean? How do they change the format up?
Well, it became a little bit more of a comedy horror. I think the first one had very brief elements of comedic interludes, but I think there's a definite another level of that when we get into the second one, and then even more so when we get to the film we're about to talk about today, which seemed to me to have crossed the line between horror comedy to comedy horror.
You're absolutely right. I think I couldn't have put that any better. You are spot on. So the first one Maybe a tiny little bit of humor, but mostly for shock and awe and to scare the audience. In the early 80s, as we know, it was banned. The second one, they ramp up the comedy. They think, where do we go with this? Let's just make it a lot more funnier. And the third one, it goes all the way into spoofery, almost spoofing itself. But here's the synopsis, just to get everyone up to speed. So Ash is transported back to medieval days, where he is captured by the dreaded Lord Arthur, aided by the deadly chainsaw that has become his only friend. Ash is sent on a perilous mission to recover the Book of the Dead, a powerful tome that gives its owner the power to summon an army of ghouls. And there you go.
Fantastic. I'm excited about it already. I've watched the movie and I'm already excited about it. So let's dig in and talk about Army of Darkness. So it's basically the end of Evil Dead 2 is the beginning of Army of Darkness, isn't it? It's the same scene when he drops, sucked through the portal into another time, and not just in another time, but another place. He's somehow taken back to medieval England. I don't know quite how that happens, but
yeah, so it's 1300 AD. Yeah, 1300 AD, medieval England. We know this because everyone talks like.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, sir. But I noticed that medieval England looks a lot like Sandy, California. In this particular movie, because I thought there aren't many. I mean, we're both English guys. I mean, you live in Scotland, I live in England, but I very rarely find desert areas. I think in England,
Ashby de la Zeus may be a bit deserty at times.
Deserted, not deserty, deserted.
You're absolutely right. So when you want to get into the producers' minds with this one, say we need a location that looks a lot like England. I know the California desert will do it, and they built a full on castle out there as well. Let's not forget they built a castle with everything that you would expect castle-y.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that the evil had drawn all the life out of the land, and that's why it was that way. You could argue that was the story. However, I just believe they filmed it where they were and didn't really give two shits about whether or not it really looked like it. That wasn't the point of the movie.
I don't think they went for factually accurate throughout the entire film, considering, and we will talk about this, considering the tools they're using, the kind of technology they've got access to even back in the day is far beyond 1300 AD. I mean, think about 1300 AD, right? So this is just after, I don't know, Robin Hood, the myth of Robin Hood. It's 100 years past William Wallace, and it's around the Crusade, so it's around that kind of period of time. It's a few hundred years past, I suppose, the Roman Empire falling as well. So and I think your theory on is it arid and dry because of the Deadites is probably one that we could take into consideration, but it doesn't quite explain why at that moment in time the dead are like fighting against everybody. It just never explains that. They're just there, it's like, I don't know.
And maybe that's why he was pulled there. Maybe that's why he was summoned to that period, sucked through the portal, because the dead were there, and that's the whole. It was accidental. The evil was taking it back to the specific time when the Necronomicon, the book of the dead, was at its strongest, maybe. So Ash basically wakes up face down in the desert. His car lands next
on
to
some
him.
patio slabs, on some paving slabs as well.
Because you're going to say because we did have concrete and cement at that time, didn't they? So, in this strange medieval England of the desert,
Wassel and door.
So he wakes up and gets a real warm welcome from the indigenous population because they think he's a fighter for the enemy. Is that
Henry.
right to say?
Yeah,
Henry.
They think he's Duke.
Henry the Red.
So it's between. Yeah, it's Duke Arthur and Henry the Red. Their tribes are warring with each other, and then there's this creepy old guy is he Merlin? Is it Camelot?
Well, you've got Arthur and you've got a wizard, but it's never stipulated as to whether this is what they're talking about. It's kind of let's just dance around it a little bit, and you can draw your own conclusions. I think was probably the way they were going with that one.
Yeah. And then we also meet the other character at the same time, which is Sheila, and Sheila is the female love interest, I would say.
We do. Once they take him back to the castle, you think, maybe what they're going to do with him? Are they going to execute him here? What? I believe she finds out that her brother has been killed by Henry's men, so she decides to spit on Ash.
That spit was disgusting. That was a proper loogie. That was.
She did.
There was a lot of liquid there.
She hocked a greenie on him, really. She did, and it was. But
I
think he liked it.
I
think he asked her to. I think it was something he asked for. That was his thing.
Go method.
Just really gob on me. Just spit on me.
So there's some funny things that happen. I don't know about you, but with Arthur and Henry fighting, it did feel a little bit Monty Python and the Holy Grail for me.
Yeah, there was a little element of that. It was like, if somebody was going to now make Game of Thrones for the Sci-Fi Channel, it felt very much like that's what was going on there, like the North and the Lannisters. There was some very bad haircuts and things going on, and
they gave him a full-on mullet, full-on redneck
proper
mullet,
yeah, with a proper fringe and everything, didn't he? He had like the full-on fringe,
bowl cut mullet.
Yeah, it was. It was like, no, you don't look silly enough yet. Give him a fringe as well. And it felt
Henry
very much like
this.
Go on, sorry.
No, go on. You finish your line of thought there. We're just both
I was going to say
this.
there's very much the English against the Scots feel as well. I don't know if you saw that. The kind of the Henry the Red felt very Scottish.
That's
felt very Hadrian's Wall kind of a battle going on there. So there was undertones of all sorts of things.
Henry does this speech for Ash, and he said, I'm Henry the Red, Lord of the Highlands, and Keeper of the Mountains, and all this kind of stuff. And Ash just doesn't look amused at all, does he? He just doesn't seem to care about Henry the Red and his plight, which was irrelevant information as the story progresses. It didn't even matter a jot of what Henry the Red is all about.
Well, I mean, Henry does help, and he comes back. And there's a reason for Henry to be there, I think, which we see at the end. But so the welcome, so that the Merlin character thinks that Ash might be the chosen one. So he's like, he might be the chosen one, and but Arthur's like, no, fuck it, down in the pit. So decides
in the pit.
And before he gets thrown in the pit, there was a troubling incident. Okay, another of Henry's men gets thrown into the pit, and I mean, I'm no doctor, right? But if you get torn apart by a creature, it doesn't normally look like someone's spraying from a power washer with the red dye. That's what looked like was coming out of the pit.
The best way I could explain this was if you had a red Capri Sun juice pocket and you stick the straw in and squeeze the straw, squeeze the packet and all the juice comes out. That's the best way I put it. But I don't know whether you picked up on this, and I've actually been dying to talk about this pit, right? And the inconsistency with the depth of this pit, because when they throw the first guy in, he falls for ages, right? And then he splashes. And then there's nothing, and all the crowd's looking in, and you can't see him because it's pitch black. So it's such a deep pit. And then, as you mentioned, the creature gets him, and this blood spurts out all over the. It's
a fine mist,
floor.
Isn't it? It's not. There's no chunks. This is a fine mist that comes out like
puree.
Like
this is pureed. Yeah. And then naturally Ash gets thrown down the pit, which then is only about 3 or 4 meters deep.
Mhm.
And everyone can
Maybe
see
the
it
other
in the
guy fell
HDCA.
very, very, very slowly. Maybe he just went, ah.
Yeah, I mean, I had a problem with this. I had a problem with the pit doors opening, the big metal steel lid that's on it, and the pulley and everything, because I don't think that was invented back then.
Well, I mean, there were such things as portcullises. So the rudimentary engineering was probably sufficient, but it did feel like it was very well constructed and very substantial, more so than the rest of the castle, which was very easily broken into, which we'll discuss later.
I kind of felt sorry for the poor guy. So one of Henry's men freaks out and tries to run away. He tries to outrun an arrow and doesn't succeed. To the amusement of the crowd and stuff, So and Henry doesn't seem bothered that his men are getting torn apart. He does not seem to care at all.
No, he doesn't give two shits, does he? Really, he's just like whatever. But rather them than me.
But we're not here. We're not here for Henry. We're not here for Arthur. We're here for Ash. We want to, because Ash gets thrown into this pit, and everyone looks on, and then this horrible creature just pops out of nowhere and starts kind of attacking him. Which again, the way he gets the first guy and just kind of pulverizes him, and it's a very clumsy fight between him and Ash, isn't it?
It really is. It's kind of well, I think it's the proof that Ash isn't a real warrior. He's just a guy that works in a department store in the homewares section. He's not a hero. He's not brave, and he's not valiant. He's just a guy in the wrong place at the wrong time.
I could not disagree more, Steve. Have you ever considered chopping off your own hand? He chops off his own hand in The Evil Dead 2 because his hand gets possessed.
Yeah, but it's that or end up like his girlfriends have done previously. So when he sees what the alternative is to
not does it laughing as well. He does it laughing, if you remember.
I think it's kind of, at that point, there may be some mild mental trauma ensuing. So the laughing is more of a coping mechanism with the sheer batshit craziness that is ensuing as a result. So
most people put a hook on it. Most people put a hook or a sock over it or whatever. He creates.
Are we still talking
chainsaw.
about the hand now, or what?
I love what he did. So the old Merlin magician guy drops the chainsaw, and he does the biggest hero leap you've ever seen, which I don't know about you. When I watched it, when I was, like an early teenager when that came out, and I saw him do that, I cheered. I was just because the way he did it, he just bloop.
Yeah, and you know why I have a problem with this, right? So this is a direct continuation from the first film. So mere hours ago, he chopped off his hand, and now he is thrusting the bloody stump into the base of a falling chainsaw. That is going to be a little bit tender, and that's going to sting a bit as that goes into the fitting. You're going to wince a little bit. You might even whimper somewhat. So, for me, that felt a little disingenuous. But you know what? This film isn't about, being exactly perfect. It is very much a pantomimic romp through 90 odd minutes of pure joy. So
could not have been any longer, though, could it? They kept the timing of the film just right. I think if it had been just 5 minutes longer, it would have been absolutely awful on that one as well. Now, I don't know if you noticed this. So just to add a bit more drama, they decide to get the spikes out and start to close the spikes. Now, again, I've got to talk about the inconsistency of this cave. 1 minute it's massive, and the next minute it's just a pit. Why didn't he run left into the massive opening of this cave to get away from the spike? He just stayed in the middle of these 6 foot long spikes.
Well, there must have been, because these creatures were living down there, right? So there must have been a place where they were, where the spikes wouldn't kill them. Otherwise, what would be the point? And also, the spikes were quite long. and I would use them as a rudimentary kind of ladder to climb
get
up
out.
and out of the
He
pit.
kind of does, doesn't he? He does
does
manage
in
to
the
climb
end.
out before. Yeah.
But I think I would have done that sooner than he did. I'm assuming that I've not been transported back to medieval times and faced deadites in the pit, so I can't genuinely say what my my true reaction would be at this point.
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. So this is where it suddenly changes, and you know, I'm sure you're going to make this point. He stops interacting with characters in a normal way, and everything that comes out of his mouth from this moment on is a quip.
It suddenly turns into like, how many catchphrases and, like you say, quips can we use? My entire script from now on is just going to be one-liners that people will be quoting for the next 30 years.
Well, as an aside, right, rather than waiting to the end to do this and then forgetting, I've written down a bunch of things he's said. Can I go through some of these just now, and then we can go back into the story?
You know what you should do? You should do that and intersperse it with ones that aren't there, and I can guess which ones are real.
Oh, that's pressure. I only wrote the ones down. Let me go through this, right? Because I wrote some of my favorite lines.
You just do the real
down
ones.
from the
It's
film.
more important.
I did write some of my favorite lines down, and whether you can agree whether they're a favorite line of yours, whether you like them. So one of my favorite lines is, because some of these, I mean, some of the insults they call each other as well. I think they're just making stuff up. One guy got called a pox brute. Never heard of that. Definitely going to use it, especially in the office. You, sir, are not one of my vassals. Was said by Henry the Red. One of my favorite lines in the whole film was, "Well, hello, Mr. Fancy Pants." This is to Henry the Red just before he gets thrown into the pit. "Well, hello, Mr. Fancy Pants. I got news for you, pal. You ain't leading on but two things, Jack and shit, and Jack left town." When he said he was the leader of the Freemen or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And then when he gets out of the pit, he turns to another guy and says, "You know your shoelace is untied." And the guy actually looks down, despite the fact that I don't think shoelaces have been invented yet.
No, I mean, it wasn't until the 80s when Tom Cruise invented the Flugelbinder in Cocktail that they truly came into their own, as far as I'm aware. So,
Yeah.
no, I agree. I think it's a strange one.
"This is my boomstick."
Yes, talking about his shotgun.
Yep. He says this to Sheila. "First you want to kill me, then you want to kiss me. Blow." I don't know what that means.
I mean, what was that, a statement or an instruction? I don't know. It could have been both.
He says this to an old possessed lady. "Yo, she bitch, let's go." Okay, the next one you'll get. So what is one of the biggest catchphrases that he's got? He does it in both movies. It's when he tools up.
I can't remember now. You put me on the spot here. I wasn't expecting a test.
He says the word groovy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Many times samples.
So he gets into a fight with Sheila and then decides to woo her with the line, "Give me some sugar, baby." Yeah. "What's that you got on your face?" I think he says to a zombie. "Maybe I'm a Chinese jet pilot" was another one of my lines where I think that's sarcasm.
Yeah, because they're all going, what? Because none of those things they would understand, because they wouldn't understand what a Chinese person was, and they also wouldn't understand what a jet pilot was. So yeah, absolutely. But I think that's intentional, isn't it? That's the point. He's taking the piss.
Well, he goes through a bit of a character arc here as well, because Sheila was, "Dost thou not love me?" And he was like, "Well, that's just pillow talk, baby." And he said it almost just like that.
Yeah.
And then I think what he said to his evil Ash, which we'll come on to, is
Oh,
buckle
yeah,
up,
yeah.
bonehead, because you're going for a ride, while he was
Mhm.
sitting on some kind of trajectory, wasn't he? He was, he was sitting on a catapult or something.
Yeah.
And then two of my favorite lines towards the end of the film is he's just about to get into a fight with a possessed person whilst he's working in the department store, and he just says names Ash housewares while while he gets a shotgun out, and then the last line in the whole film: "Hail to the king, baby."
Hail to the king, baby. Absolutely.
So there you
Which
go.
is a
There
classic
is
last line because, he's essentially crowned himself. He could have stayed in the past and become an actual king, but chose to go back and work in a supermarket. So, that says a lot. Yeah, so back to the story a little bit then to take us back. So he manages to escape the pit, and he's said, they think, oh yeah, maybe he is the chosen one that will save us from the dead eyes. And they ask him to go and get the book for him, and he's like, absolutely not. I'm not going to go and get this book. And they went, without the book, we can't send you back to your time. So he's kind of like, yeah, all right then, I suppose so. But he really doesn't give two shits about anybody but himself at this point in the movie. He's like, yeah, I'm not fussed, but
Well,
I'll
it
go and get
becomes
it
a
anyway.
bit slobby as well, because that scene where he kind of saves everyone and he somehow gets his shotgun back. He's like chewing on grapes, and there's women fanning him down and stuff, and he's chewing on turkey legs, and he's just like being a general kind of
he looks like
slobby brute, isn't he?
Well, he basically looks like the archetypal lord from one of those medieval dinner things you see you do if you've ever been to like Florida or in Mallorca. They have them, where you go and they do some jousting and stuff, and you all eat a meal together. It felt very much like the main actor in one of those.
Like the cable guy,
yeah,
like the scene in the cable guy.
exactly like the scene in the cable guy. So yeah, it was a bit of a strange one, and he agrees to go and get the Necronomicon, and there were some very important instructions, which is key to this entire movie. He had to repeat the words exactly when he picked up the Necronomicon. Can you remember the words he needed to say?
Oh, Naratu,
Nestu,
Nestu, Varatu,
Varatu.
Nocte.
which is what he does. He coughs because he can't remember. This is after one of the books has tried to bite his hand off, another one tried to suck his face off, which ends up elongating his face in a strange rubber mask, which again was bizarre.
Tried to suck out his face into another wormhole. But you've jumped something so incredibly important. I know we kind of cover this to the nth degree, but we got to talk about that windmill scene.
Well, absolutely, and there's me
the
not
windmill.
remembering that came before it. So yeah, he notices something on his shoulder, and he lifts up his he pulls his shirt down and sees an eyeball on his shoulder. Now that would freak the shit out of me. I know that's for certain.
So he's now, if you remember, he builds a mechanical hand somehow with the blacksmith before his quest. And it's like this real strong, I don't know how to describe it. It's like a Terminator hand, isn't it?
Well, yeah, because it's basically a gauntlet from a suit of armor that he's got these pistons in that are connected to, the muscles in his arms. Sort of, it's a pressure thing that when he squeezes
is a genius.
his muscles,
Could you do
incredible.
that? You could probably do it because you're very good with that stuff. But
not quite.
I couldn't do it. I wouldn't even know where to start with that, and or try to explain it to the 13th, the 12th and 14th century blacksmith. But you're right. He goes into this windmill, and then he sees a mirror. Now, if anyone that's seen Evil Dead 2, you'll know that Ash had a problem with mirrors in that one because the demons can do something with the mirror. So he decides to smash the mirror, and what happens, because his reflection is kind of giving him this evil look, lots of little mini ashes jump out of the shards of this mirror and start to torture him through the worst possible ways. And let me go through how they torture him. So they really, I don't think anyone would survive very much. So they stab him with a fork, bang his head, trip him up, burn his face in a hot place. They prise it off with a spatula. They put a nail in his foot. They slip him and knock him out. And then they tie him up. One dives into his mouth. He then manages to break free, and he drinks boiling hot water to kill it.
Straight from a kettle, which you kind of
Straight
go
from a kettle. And laughs at the same time. He is laughing and giggling.
I mean, he's got a form there. He did that when he chopped his hand off, didn't he? So I feel like there's some sadomasochism going on here. And are we led to believe the one that jumped in him is actually the one that comes out of his shoulder?
That is the one that comes out. So this is the kind of eyeball, the really weird looking eyeball in his shoulder. Yeah, so that kind of brings us to your point where then they do this crazy run through the forest where there's kind of four of them attached to each other. Two of them, sorry. Yeah. And they're punching each other in the faces.
So he's sort of separating eventually, isn't he? And they become Ash and Evil Ash, and they look identical. And a battle and a fight ensues, and there's it's very slapstick and very comedic and and it basically culminates in Ash killing Evil Ash and chopping him up into bits.
Well, he shoots him in the face at point blank range with a shotgun.
Yeah, I mean that's going to do some damage, to be fair.
But it didn't, though. The weird thing is, it didn't seem to do that much damage because when his head's he chops him up and he throws him into the grave, and then Ash's head just kind of jumps out, and he's like, "Don't!" And he starts throwing mud in his face and winding him up. But then the next time you see him as Evil Ash, he's all mutated and stuff, and it's like he's decomposed within about 23 minutes.
And the shotgun wound is back. Yeah, so on his face, you can see his lower jaw is all disconnected and stuff. So. Yeah, it's a very, very bizarre sort of timeline of events there. But one that's very important that when we'll see in the whole Evil Ash bit does come back later on after he's and probably wouldn't have done if he'd got the words right in calling, in his incantation to get the Necronomicon. It would have basically stopped the dead from rising if he'd done it properly.
So this is the bit where I need an explanation. Because this is the bit that again, you know me, I question these things. I probably look a bit too deep into it. Firstly, I had a real problem with the cemetery because Gothic cemeteries did not exist back then. Oops, that was me dropping my notes on the floor.
I thought you should drop your wallet for a minute then. Sorry.
I live in Scotland. We don't have any money. Secondly...
not to share.
But secondly... why do the dead want this book? I know it's to raise the army of the dead, but it looks like it's in a place where the dead is already at. I just couldn't understand. Do they need a body to do it? And if so, why can't they just possess a peasant and just go and get it?
I think they couldn't take it. So what they have to do is have him release it, and then they can have it. That was part of the problem. I think probably Evil Ash may have been able to do it,
but they
which is why
get it. They don't get it. He just gets the words wrong and raises the army of the dead because he never said the words to contain the army of the dead.
No, but then Evil Ash goes to get it, and I have a feeling that Evil Ash, because he is part of Ash, has that small amount of humanity which allows him to read the book and pull it through. That's my assumption. Based on, I mean, we're trying to rationalize here a book about, the second sequel in a movie trilogy. There's not usually a lot of sense to be made of these things, so I think we just have to kind of go with the punches here a little bit.
This is when it just completely fast forwards, though, isn't it? So much happens in like kind of 25 minutes. It's the whole arc of the film just takes on from here. Did I enjoy? So there's obviously a great influence of the Three Stooges.
Very much so.
On the following scenes, especially with all the skeleton hands coming out the ground and kind of punching him and hitting him and what have you.
Well, this is it, and again, this kind of a very similar. You don't know what influence like the Lord of the Rings has had on this, because obviously the book I'm talking about, not the movie, because we know that the movie came after it. Before you make that comment, Michael, I know you might well. Basically, the rise, the pulling of the orcs from the ground, the dead elves essentially, and what have you, the raising of the dead. It's a very similar scene to that with the skeletons. They're basically just, as soon as a skeleton is pulled out of the ground, is then handed a shovel to go and dig up more skeletons, and to create this army of the dead that's then going to go after the book and bring evil back to the earth.
Re-establish the evil. Now, it's funny you said that, actually, because I did make a note during the big battle when they sieged the castle that it was very Helm's Deep.
Yes.
So I don't know, maybe it did influence Peter Jackson's trilogy, and he says, you know what, I want to make it like Army of the Dead, but better, but good.
See, Peter Jackson had Helm's Deep, whereas it felt very much like Raimi had Balls Deep here.
So Ash gets back. Sheila gets kidnapped, as you do, by a flying bat thing.
Yeah, it's basically an evil demon creature, isn't it? And I think because there's a bit of Ash in him, he remembers her and knows that by turning her, that will really pish. That'll really pish Ash off. So he basically snogs her with his deformed, gaping mouth.
That is not going to win the MTV Music Awards, is it? For Best Kiss?
No,
teethy. He had no lips left.
Yeah, Tobey Maguire does not need to worry about losing his title.
It's definitely the way he does it, though. He's got like kind of his chin is jutting out and stuff. Now, is that Bruce Campbell in makeup or is that someone else? Because I couldn't quite.
It's really difficult to tell. I think it should be Bruce Campbell in makeup because essentially it was Bruce Campbell who was the character. I'm assuming Evil Ash was. We should have done our research and looked it up. We probably should have done, but you know what? Who cares? I did.
I did look at it, and if you look at the credits, because I was really interested to find out whether Sheila played evil Sheila, because she does seem to change quite dramatically as evil possessed Sheila, and they did play those characters, which again for me just that for me saved it all, because it did show a good bit of range and stuff, and they were characterizing it different.
And it showed that the makeup was pretty good as well for that. And maybe that was a little bit of an influence to why Daisy liked the movie. Maybe that makeup was enough to just sway her, and
just
when making her quick decision, that was the one she chose. So
well, I personally loved and enjoyed the stop motion skeletons, because it's not something you get now. Everything's CGI, and you know, I know you'll make some comparisons.
No, yeah. I mean, you look at someone like Harryhausen, but it's very good. It's very good CGI that they've used, and the thing I really like about this style is how very otherworldly it seems and very inhuman. So it's very kind of, it doesn't feel earthly, which gives it a creepiness, because it doesn't feel like there's a soul to these things. That's what makes it feel eviler. Bear in mind, as we've already discussed, this is the same year Jurassic Park came out. But you've got to remember that CGI was in its very early infancy for living creatures. For a lot of it,
there was
and so this was the standard that was to be expected, really, of any kind of creature, unless you were in a suit. Which, if you're a skeleton, it's either going to be a puppet or a suit. Or stop motion, and I think it was handled really well, and I think the interactions with the stop motion were very good, and I think it was funny. I mean, it was genuinely an enjoyable romp for me.
Why were they all from Dorset and Cornwall, though? Why were all the skeletons talking like that?
Well,
We're evil
mainly
skeletons.
because I think the Camelot was supposed to be down that way, so maybe that was it. Maybe they felt that there was a piratey feel to it, which again would because if you look at the way they behave, that is very sort of very much the way that like Pirates of the Caribbean, the pirates behave very similarly. There's that feeling of that naughtiness that the skeletons had that it took away from, like it wasn't like the sort of Jason and the Argonauts or Clash of the Titans sort of skeletons where they were they were just mindless creatures. These had character and wants, needs, desires, and fears. They were kind of rounded um, individuals.
Well, the one thing that travels with Ash, can you remember what goes with him along with his shotgun, his hand? Sorry, not his hand, his chainsaw and himself.
Well, his car, his trash car,
with a treasure trove of things in the boot.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not sure if it was his girlfriend who was the chemistry major, or if I imagined that, but he did seem to have just the right kind of textbooks in there to enable him to create some sort of arsenal of weapons to fight off a dead army.
He has Mechanics and Chemicals 101, the two books in the back of his car, and then he trains the medieval folk up on how to battle with spears, how to make explosives, and in one day only, how to turn his car into a steam engine with a massive propeller on it.
Yeah, it felt very much. There was a bit of a nod to Brain Dead there. I felt that kind of giant. If anybody has ever seen Brain Dead, and we're talking Peter Jackson again, one of his early movies, he used a lawnmower to kill zombies. And it felt very much like that with his rotating blades going around and killing the undead. But there was also the sense of that it felt like his self-defense lessons by Jane Fonda was what he was using to to fight off the army of the undead. At which point they probably just would have gone with a big sword and killed the humans. But it's a movie, so it's okay.
Yeah. So this is where it becomes a little inconsistent for me, because the effects are really, really ropey towards the end. So even when they're fighting the skeleton, it's like they're throwing Halloween shop skeletons at them. They're just like, that's what it felt like.
And I think that's probably Halloween what they did. Yeah, and I think that's what they did, and they almost do it on purpose. I think there's a very cheeky nod and a wink and going, look, guys, we haven't got a massive budget. We're going to do this. We're going to have fun. It's a prop. I know it's a prop. Just enjoy it, okay? Just use your imaginations and just enjoy it. And you know what? The comedy element really helps in that situation. Really pushes that bit of the story through, I think.
I agree. And he wins. They win the day. And here's a question. So the book. So the reason why he went for the book in the first place is so he can get home, because in the passage of the books, there is a way for him to take some kind of ointment, take some kind of drink, which will wake him back in his own time, right?
That's right, yeah.
Why doesn't Sheila go with him?
Well, he does offer for her to come with him, doesn't he? But she's like, oh, this is my time, and no, I need to stay here.
I think if I'd been possessed by a demon, I think I'd be looking to get out of there, to be honest with you.
But you know what? Maybe he didn't encourage her. Maybe he was like, I mean, I like you, but you're kind of a holiday fling, and when I get back, I'm not so fussed, and I want to still play the field. My last two girlfriends have died. I maybe don't want to commit so quickly. That's possibly why. But yeah, it's a
good way of looking at it. I think his last two girlfriends were both called Linda, and she's called Sheila.
Yeah. Well, maybe he'd seen Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, and the maybe the girlfriends, the medieval girlfriends, they didn't want to go down the same route.
So I have one last interesting fact to give you on this one.
Go for it.
What ending did you see when this came out?
So I saw the ending that we saw, which is he takes the potion, and next thing you know, he's back in normal times. He's working at the department store in the homewares department, and then suddenly a Deadite appears in the store, and he fights and kills it, makes a quip, and actually states that when they said, "Oh well, you definitely got the incantation right this time, didn't you?" Because of that, because of what happened last time he did. He's like, "Yeah, pretty much." So you realize he's done the same thing again. You're kind of like, "You're a dick now. You deserve this because you've been a dick. You made a mistake the first time, but you definitely wouldn't forget it the second time. You'd have written it down. You know, you could make a steam powered helicopter type thing out of your car. You can fathom a pencil." And that's what it just felt like. But that was the version I saw. Why did you see something different?
So the version that I just watched was, I've never seen that before. I've never seen that last scene in Homewares. The scene I'd seen as a child was a different ending. So I don't know if you're aware of this. There was 2 endings made. I saw the original ending. This is the alternative one. And the studio execs obviously did their thing and they meddled, and they felt that the original ending was too bleak. Do you want to know what the original ending was? Because I remember we were talking about this, and I said, "Oh yeah, do you remember the end where he wakes up in the future?" And you looked at me like I was crazy. You were like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, that was the ending." So the actual original ending was, he's in his cave in his car and he's taking the drops, and he hears something like movement and like a kind of rock falls. So he miscounts the amount of drops he's meant to take. He's meant to only take 3. He miscounts, ends up taking 4, and then just going to sleep. And then he wakes up in his car and he's got this big beard and this long hair and stuff like that. And he crawls out of the cave, and the whole world is on fire, and it's just post-apocalyptic. Like the whole world has ended, and he just drops on his knees and he's like, no. And that's where it ends. That's the ending I had seen and I had grown up with. So I'd never seen this one. And I think they tested it and audience didn't like it and said they wanted something a bit more upbeat. So they re-recorded. And this was like 2 months after they re-recorded that scene with Ash in Homewares. Because when you said that, I was like, no, I don't remember that. He wakes up in the future, because they, of course, brought out a TV show on Netflix. And I was saying to you, I can't quite understand how he's got back from the future. And
I was looking at you like you were a crazy person.
Yeah. As if to say, what the hell is he going on about?
Well, because that post-apocalyptic thing feels very much like they've mixed up Back to the Future and Planet of the Apes. It feels like it's very much borrowed from a combination of those two. You know, like the thingy in the cave and all of that. So
you can YouTube it. The clip is on YouTube. If you want to see the version I'd seen. I'm glad I've seen the new version, and actually I quite like it better because it's got a few more quips in it, and it's got the girls hanging off him, baby. Hail Kit to the King, which is probably the best line of an ending that I've seen in a while, to be honest with you. So that was that. That was my last fact of the Evil Dead 3 Army of Darkness. It did go on to make, I think, 2 or 3 series of Ash versus the Evil Dead.
Yeah, again, and very much keeping with that. Not quite as slapstick as that the series wasn't, but it was, followed a similar vein, but was slightly more grizzled in his older age when he did it. But it's Bruce Campbell, and you've got to love Bruce Campbell. So
you do, Steve, and I've got to say it is a bad script, because it is riddled with continuity issues. It doesn't really know what it's pitching at. It doesn't really have an audience in mind. It's obviously going for cult status, which it's achieved.
Yeah,
but I can't see any other actor being able to pull that film off in the way that Bruce Campbell did. It's forgivable because of him, I think.
Absolutely, and I think it was. Let's not forget, it was essentially at this point written by and for him as the Bruce Campbell show, and it works. And you know what? Thoroughly enjoyable. So, Mike, as always, we like to do a little bit of a rating on these things. So we're going to say then today, could you give us a rating out of 5? And I want you to do it in chainsaws. How many chainsaws out of 5 do you give?
Okay. For nostalgia and for a palate cleanser after the last episode, I'm going to give this 3.5 chainsaws.
Ooh, a fair score. I think I am slightly more nostalgic than you, and I'm gonna go for the heady heights of 4 chainsaws.
Our highest
4
rated film
chainsaw
yet.
so far. An enjoyable romp. One for the boys, I think. Not really, in general, a girls' movie, although it was one of our cast members, Daisy, who recommended it. So, you know, sometimes these things can happen that way. But you know what? A genuinely enjoyable film. So anybody who's listened to this and hasn't seen it, be sure to check it out. It's well worth a watch. As are many of the films made around this time. Be sure to check them out. Some real good romps in that period. Mike, I guess it leaves nothing really more to say other than thank you everybody for listening. And I'm going to leave the last words of today's episode to you.
Hail to the king, baby.
Bad Scripts was written and performed by Mike Garlia and Steve Jones, a Beach Tide production.